Take your CJ7 all the way to 11. Jeepin' with cool guy.
This isn't going to be my most informative video yet, but what I'm going to try and do is show you what you need to do to install a new floor pan. There's a couple that you can go out and get that I think are fairly decent. There's the OMX Ada one, then there's the one that's by Juan JD or whatever. I think that one's almost the same as the OMX or the OMX Ada one. And then there's the pieces that you can get from Classic Enterprises. Classic Enterprises is a pretty good setup. I've already installed a couple other things that I think that we've referenced earlier. But I've already cut out the rear floor pan. I'm going to show you where these pieces are and what you need to do or what to expect. And then I'm going to eventually put this thing back in and weld it into place. And hopefully we should be done with it. So areas that you're probably going to have to wind up either taking out spot welds, replacing the panels, or if you got really super lucky, there's not as much rust. I think it is lucky. So on your rear floor pan, the extension of the valance, whatever you want to call it, comes all the way out to here. And there's a metal piece that sits over the top of this to keep whatever debris falling into that. But the spot welds, they pretty much just put a spot weld here, here, and then a cup, 1, 2, 3, 4, give or take. So they're around the outer edge of that part. There's nothing really connecting them down here. So I'm going to weld that back into place. But the only piece on this side that had rusted out was this part. So I just cut it out right at the top of the line that completes the actual floor, and then used some 18 gauge steel, bent the edge around, and then tack welded it in. I'm going to tell you right now, be very careful and very slow when you're welding body panels on this, because this 18 gauge stuff warps super easy. I'll show you what actually happened. Actually, you can see it here. Talk about that next. Two pieces to talk about here. You've got your long piece of the wheel well, which is spot welded like 30 times to the rear lip or the bottom lip of your floor pan. Mine had rusted out from here to here, so I pretty much was only able to save this last piece. But I cut this up about 2.5 inches and then welded in a new piece of sheet metal. I actually went with 16 gauge here, so I upped the gauge up a little bit, so it was a little more difficult to weld in 16 to 18 gauge. But as you can see, this is a long span piece of thin 18 gauge metal, and this heats up. So tacking this along, I went too fast, and as a result, you can see how I've got a little bit of warp bend in there. This will not be much of an issue when I actually tack weld the floor pan back into it, but it's not perfect and it's a little annoying. The other part is your back bench brackets. The pieces, when you put your back bench up, this locks in. This had rusted through, so there's 2 spot welds on this thing, and I drilled them out from behind. And then I took out the metal plate that has the 2 screws in there, cut out this piece, and then re-welded in a new piece. So there's a new piece here, and a new piece here, and then I just spot welded the, or actually tack welded the new plate, or the plate back in after I had treated it, cleaned it up, and so on. So on this side and on this side, you've got this long piece that connects to the bottom of your floor pan, and then you've got the bracket connecting, or the holding bracket, latch bracket for the rear bench. For me, that was my scenario. Alright, here's the floor pan. So this is the front part that I was telling you about, with the outer wing that goes right, welds into the back of the rocker panel and the B-pillar, and this is the lip that lands on that flange from the wheel well. This panel right here, I actually cut out from the old floor pan. These floor pans come with this open air area over here. So I actually just tried to get as close to factory as I could, cut out that upper panel that has this outer this outer flange more or less, and then welded it all back onto the actual piece. When you get this or you see a close-up of it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So this is just trying to get it as close as I could to factory. But this is your overall floor pan. This is the part that goes right in behind that area that I showed you a couple minutes ago, right below the gas filler hole. And then you're going to spot weld or tack weld this part to the actual back corner panel. Quarter panel? Fender? I'm not even really quite sure which one it is. So there you go. Now we're going to look at the underside of the floor pan. This is your heat shield. This goes right above the catalytic converter / muffler. I actually took this off of the old floor pan because it wasn't completely rusted out. The floor was, but I wanted to keep this because I'm trying to keep it as close to factory as I can, even though I'm replacing the whole thing with not quite up to par floor pan, whatever. But this is just held on with a couple spot welds, easy to take out, and then I just tack welded it back in. I have spray painted this with engine temperature paint with some primer on it, and now I've got it as close as I can to factory. The other thing that I probably would need to do is there is a body mount back here for the rear support arms, which I guess is an optional thing that helps support this. I'm not really quite sure how they go in, but they're exactly like these body mounts. So I'm probably going to take the other body mount, or the pieces, the mounts from the other floor pan, and I'll show you that as I renovate those. And I'm going to weld them into here just so that I can have that option of having that rear support arm. So as we get closer to actually putting the floor pan back in, I want to do a little bit more prep work. So I've sprayed this whole thing down, I've sanded it all down, and then I sprayed it with weld through primer. Because basically once you get this thing on there, you have no way of getting anything in there that's going to seal it up outside of the actual sealer. So get yourself a good foundation on there, get some weld through primer on there, and then you have to take into consideration where you actually want to do it, how you want to weld it in. If you are fortunate enough to have access to a spot welder, good on you. I might run out to Harbor Freight and grab their $160 spot welder. The other option is that I make my own spot welds. So you get a metal punch and pneumatic metal punch, and you just pop a whole bunch of holes in here that you weld through. So you have to take in consideration, where do you want your weld? Do you want your weld on the inside of your floor pan, or do you want your weld on the outside of the wheel well? Because I'm actually going to go with the outside wheel well, because that way I can have access to grinding the welds down, as opposed to, and I can get more welds in that way. Where if I did it on the floor pan, that's more difficult because of all the cross members supports that are actually on the bottom of the floor pan. So I think that I'm just going to go with the outside, and it should be an easy way to go. I will punch these holes after I put the floor pan in for the final fitting, just so that I know what level that I need to put these things in there, because I don't want to go punching a bunch of holes and then them not line up right. So I'm trying to put this thing in here for the final fit before I punch all the holes and everything and get everything lined up. And finding this is a real pain in the ass to get in here, because you have to get these front panels, arms, whatever you want to call them, the rear riser, over the rocker panel flange, and I don't really know how to do that. So it's like I'm trying to figure out how to angle the thing in there but I don't have any idea how you would actually get this thing in there. So I'm gonna have to screw around with this, try it, and if I figure it out, I'll let you know, obviously. Alright, this is proving to be a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. So I'm going to use my air punch flange tool, and I'm going to punch some holes because I got a feeling that once I get this thing in place, I'm not taking it back out to punch the holes. So I'm actually just I'm gonna go back on what I said before. I'm gonna do the holes in the actual floor pan itself and then weld it from the inside. And then maybe I could pop some holes with a drill on the outside if I need some extra reinforcement. But for right now, I gotta punch some holes. Well, not ideal, but I couldn't figure out any other way of doing it. So I just took a pair of 10 snips and I cut the little edge down here on the bottom of the rocker, and I bent this flange out. Now it's kind of unfortunate because now I'm going to have to go in and I'm going to have to do a little bit of body work, and hopefully I can get this thing flattened out and bent back into shape. Other than that, I have absolutely no idea because there's no way of getting the trunk piece forward arms into this slot, sliding it in. And you can't bring it down because you can't get it past the upper lip of the body. So that's unfortunately apparently what you have to do. So, okay, moving on. There it is in all of its glory. Yes! So I got everything lined up. It's in there. I've got these clamps holding it into place because this lip is not enough to actually hold the thing up by itself. But got it all in there. Everything lines up. I just want to make sure that my lines going down here and here are as level as they can be. It fits in on the front arm as exactly as I wanted it to. Right? Prepping for the final install. Before I cut out the floor pan and did all the other work, I measured from here to here and then from here to here to make sure everything was square when I put it back together. This came out at 35 7/8 from here, that seam to that seam, and then from the top corner to the top corner. Other thing that I measured was from the top of the floor pan to the top edge of the wheel well. I measured that at 11, it's between 11 1/8 and 11 1/4. So I mean we're talking 1/8 of an inch between here and the back. It's nothing that's going to affect anything, but I just wanted to make sure that I had everything accurate. So now I've measured everything out. It syncs up perfectly. This is 11 1/4, and this is 35 7/8 from there to there. So now I just got to make sure everything's fit and finished, and I'm going to start welding. So I'm going to start with tacking in the back panel here, just along the seam line. That way I can move forward from here, and I know that I'm at least set on the right depth. So there we go. Alright, now that I got a couple of those tacked in, now I'm going to move under the wheel wells where the bottom support flange for the floor pan is. And I'm going to work my way forward, clamping as I go to make sure everything's nice, straight, and tight. Alright, moving forward, we've already done the spot welds or plug welds on the floor flange that tie into the wheel well. Now we're going to move forward, and I've already done a couple of them. I'm going to do the top-down welds for the front part of the floor pan. It's easier to weld down than it is up. On the middle part, I'm going to have to weld up, which is kind of a pain in the butt, and you got to crank up this wire speed on your welder. But for right now, I've got these two in, and I'm just going to go and clamp as much as I can and get it as tight as I possibly can. Just finished up welding in the front of the rear floor pan, the riser, to the actual floor pans themselves. Got that all clamped down real nice. Made sure that all the welds and all the corners were covered. And now it's finished up welding in the back part. So I ran a seam of just quick spot welds, quick burst welds to fill this in. I don't really know its factory. I've looked all over the place and I've seen different variations. So I ran a bunch of spot beads, so that when I sand this down, there will be some holes in here that will look a little bit more like it was welded / seam sealed. Okay, so there you go. And then you also need to run a couple plug welds around the outside, so you have to really go in through your actual rear fender here, quarter panel, to tap these in, very much like the ones that you had drilled out to be able to get into, or be able to put in your floor pan. So, long-winded explanation. There you go. Got it all covered. We're in. Now it's just a matter of grinding all these seams down and all the welds, and that's pretty much it for the floor pan. We're in. Super excited, super solid, everything's square. Now we need to move on to the wheel well area that has rusted through, and that'll be the next part.